Hello, everyone. We're back with the next house in our series. So we're doing the third house. And I was just thinking before we began to give a little mention to Linda. Linda Dunson, as many of us might know, put all of this together. And from a third house Gemini perspective, what's happening? We tune in, we're hearing words, and the words are then coming into our awareness through the faculties of hearing, right, through our audio faculties. And these words, as it's integrated in our mind, are added to the existing frameworks of reality that we've already established. So she created this whole EA education system where people can learn. Each time there's a class, what's happening? Words are shared, which represents information or perspective or insights about all things evolutionary astrology / evolutionary astrology, more or less. And in total, the experience of hearing all the words and the insights and the perspective and thus data has served to add a more holistic framework of insight and understanding about the soul and astrology, the essence of what evolutionary astrology is teaching, right? And then all the other astrological modalities that have come in. And this is what the third house is. There's something infinite about EA Zoom meetings from the perspective that there are an infinite number of things to talk about. Just pick evolutionary astrology, for example. There are an infinite number of classes, topics, and ways of thinking and ways of organizing and kind of eliciting perspective and insight that can deem the possibility of an infinite number of classes. And I mean that, for real, infinite. There's actually no end to learning. There's no end to data. So let's take a moment and analyze this idea. Well, first, just acknowledging that about what these classes are, I want to just bring a moment of acknowledgement and appreciation to Linda for what she's created. Because the benefit of the third house is it supports our ongoing soul journey by way of anytime we're talking to someone else, anytime we're in an interface where someone's going to say something, if we're open to listening, we're literally going to learn something new and we're going to see our reality in a way that you've never seen it before. Anytime anything is happening, actually, anytime we're open to an experience where we're taking in information through our sensory faculties, it's actually not just hearing. And we allow that information to land in our awareness such that it adds to the existing frameworks of understanding that we have. So this vehicle is a beautiful gift and form of service that this soul has brought forward. Oh, let's mute you. And you might want to mute yourself. Here we go. A beautiful framework that has been brought forward for all of us to learn and to continue to expand our understanding. So just wanted to really give appreciation to that as a wonderful way to introduce the third house archetype. Okay, so let's take a moment to understand the nature of the idea of data and information. Data and information is actually a very interesting thing to think about. From a purely objective point of view, there is no such thing as data. There's no such thing as information. Information and data exists only relative to the subject-object split. There has to be a subjective consciousness having an experience in life, in time, and time is implied here, and thus space is also implied, where this consciousness is extending awareness seemingly outside of itself to learn about reality. There needs to be a learner. There needs to be actually an evolutionary journey in the first place. Being a learner and learning always happens in time. And time and space is the framework from which learning and insights and discovery actually happens, directly implies that there is a reason for the learning. And there's a reason for the experiences of expansion and discovery, which points to the fact of our soul evolutionary journey. One thing Jeff Green beautifully spoke about when speaking about Mercury, but we can also extend this to the third house archetype, is Mercury, in a sense, points to the very curious reality that we're all going to see things differently and we're all going to be interested in learning different things. And the question is why? And it points back to everyone's evolutionary journey is different. The kinds of information we're drawn to, Thus the kinds of conversations and exposure to data and experience that we're all going to have at the core points back to our underlying soul program, why we're here in this life in the first place. So we start with that foundation, that the fact of learning, the fact of there being data in the first place is actually not an objectively true experience. In other words, we can say God didn't create data. It actually only exists relative to the unique experience of being here on a journey of evolution. And thus, the kinds of information, experiences, and thoughts that we have about life, and that which we're seeking to investigate and realize and expand upon, all points back to the reasons for why we're drawn to investigate and expand upon what we know and learn and understand more. We can understand the third house from the point of view of, we come into this world, we don't know what anything means. We don't know how anything works. A child asks you, why is this sky blue? You can tell them, actually, this is a really good technique. I've learned this and I think it's really interesting. Don't be too logical with children, because we tend to think that our logical frameworks of reality are like really smart and sophisticated and we've got it all figured out. And so we'll tell our children, oh, it's a reflection of the ocean or whatever. I don't know why the sky is blue, by the way. So whatever the adult reason is, we'll say that to them, right? But to understand that actually implies a certain level of intelligence and the capacity to apprehend a certain level of complexity, right? Like, why are you singing right now? You can say, oh, because I'm happy. It's just like the connection between the two is it's a little bit hard to understand. But if you say, oh, for the same reason that birds sing in the morning, it's logic. This is existent because of the same reason that this. It's associating thoughts to form a logical conclusion, but the nature of that logic is very poetic and very open. It leaves a whole lot of space for the imagination. So why do birds sing in the morning? Well, it's up to that child to kind of figure that out. And they could ask, if they ask another question, we can work with that. We have to be mindful. And again, so children are a great example of this. It's useful to be mindful of our logical constructs and how they often become a closed loop where we've figured it all out. We know the answers to everything and we know how it all works. And what's happening as we come into this world, we don't know how it all works. And we actually don't need to know how it all works. There's an inherent innocence and openness. If we just consider for a moment the natural, and I'll share this archetypal chart here, the natural square between Gemini, 3rd house, and 12th house Pisces. There is just the rawness of experience and the truth of oneness. And oneness is itself. It doesn't think of itself as a hand, a computer, dead, alive, a piece of hair, a person. It just is. It's indiscriminate. That's the nature of the oneness. And so that's also our true nature. And as we develop more of a subjective consciousness, like this lower quadrant, 1st, 2nd, 3rd house, there's a lot of self-awareness that's grown over time, right? We become more aware of our environment and more curious about our environment. It's meaningful to understand that before babies actually know how things work, before they know the scientific, logical physics for the interconnectedness between things, before logic is really developed in the ways that it is for adults, they're mimicking. My daughter, for example, she'll mimic, and sometimes I'll test. I'll be like, do you want to take a nap? No, right? And I'm like, do you really? She understands those things. But sometimes I'll make, do you really understand what I'm saying? Or are you just nodding your head? Do you want to eat an elephant? I'm like, okay, I don't think you, okay. But she learned that. And it's really beautiful to watch the mimicry that babies and young children do. What is that about? This is the 3rd house, Mercury, Gemini, adaptability. Adapting to the environment and being able to articulate one's experience, one's expressions, one's sounds. How is language learned? Not through some sort of linear comprehension process. Everything's manifesting within context. And through the mimicking, we're actually allowing ourselves to become available and attuned to the energies of the environment. And we say and we do things, if I'm doing something, she might mimic what I'm doing, but not understanding what it is that I'm actually doing. And that also helps us to build coordination. Coordination is a third house thing. Coordination, I'm going to use my hands as an example, is a way of communicating ideas, expressing them. And besides for the communication of ideas, coordination is also a way of interacting with life. If you want to exchange goods from one person to another, you'll exchange that, right? You're going to use your hands to give and take. Coordination means we're able to be adaptable to different moments, different experiences, and know how to posture ourselves so that we can participate. Like, we're wired to be able to be in a relationship with life, to be a part of a feedback loop of sharing, integration, learning, and communication. It's just incredibly meaningful to understand that we do this before we really understand anything. It's like a natural movement of consciousness to be able to integrate and be a part of life experience and to be able to adopt to the environment. And what that does is it sets each one of us up to be able to interact, from which we can develop more and more of a curiosity, right? We're talking and we're communicating with body language, with words. We're understanding the body language and the word. We're doing all of that before we're asking questions about life. Right? So the most basic foundational starting point is we're learning how to be in relationship to our environment so we can participate with it. And then that takes us deeper into greater and greater inquisitiveness into the various parts of life and how it all works together. And we can say, in a sense, it's working with the seemingly big, wide open space of life experience where everything just is how it is. We don't know how it works. We started off not needing to know how it works, right? So there's an important piece that I'm offering here. We started off not needing to know, participating. And then there's a natural, innocent curiosity that emerges. And following the flow of that curiosity is a way of actually beginning to take all the pieces and put it back together. And we actually begin to develop a sense of logic and order out of life by following that trail of curiosity and openness. And what it says is, fundamentally, there is a unity. Unity is the foundational state of reality. And there's a mechanism within all of us that knows that to be true because we are all connected and one with the source. And thus the curiosity is a way in which we are all seeking to know more of this oneness. Most people on this soul journey, in fact, probably everyone, meaning almost no one, will be able to understand the logical reality of everything, how it's all interconnected. But it's an ongoing journey of realization and discovery. And this can go as deeply as we want to take it. We can learn an infinite number of things about anything. And the infinite number of things that we learn about anything will, in fact, open the doors to understand and provide more perspective for everything and anything else. And that itself just becomes more and more of an expansion. And where do we go with that? Well, it's never ending. This is a part of the teaching of the third house. To stay in the curiosity and the appreciation and the joy of the learning experience and to know what it's for. The trick here is to not get stuck in the grasping mind that is trying to arrive at a total cohesive comprehension of reality through the logical function, because it can't happen. It never, never, never will ever happen through logic. An analogy that I've often used for that, it's like taking a very complex polygon with many, many lines And you can't ever make that a circle. You can draw a lot of really, really, so you have a zillion small lines, but it's still not going to be a circle. It might look like one, it's ever approaching it, but these are still lines. And so as long as we're staying in the linear world as a determinant for our own sense of security, because we understand how everything works, we're always going to be striving to know more. Okay, so that's the perspective on data that I want to share here. Data and information is infinite. We can always extract more. And getting all of it and knowing all of it is not the point, because we started off this world not even needing to know how it works. The point in the third house is to be able to interact. That's it. In being able to interact, we are enabling ourselves to be wherever we are, any country, any environment, and to be able to participate in the expansive process of evolutionary growth. So the very virtue of me having learned the English language, having learned how to articulate ideas and concepts into constructed sentences, allows me to do this with you. And because there's a certain shared ground, I'm using words that everyone understands. And I'm speaking about astrology, which everyone understands, and I'm providing more perspective with these words on this particular facet of astrology. And again, it's fun to think about it. We can have 100 different class topics on just the third house if we wanted to. We can just let's analyze how does learning happen, and go really deeply into early childhood brain development. We can look at the archetype of curiosity. What is curiosity from the point of view of consciousness? Psychologically, what is it like to live in a state of curiosity versus living in a state of certainty about how everything works together? I had this one experience in a college class I took. I took a sort of an amateur physics class once. And I was doing a lot of self-study in astrology, but I wanted to learn some astronomy as well. And the teacher that I had was one of those people that was very certain and very clear that the knowledge we have of science is reality and everything else is pseudoscience and not real. And that's one of those things that I think is hilarious about the human species. We tend to think that our logical frameworks and even our formulations and postulations for how things work are absolute. Most of our logical frameworks are not complete. In fact, none of them are. There's always a question at the end. There has to be. There's always more data, more information, more to learn about something. So we can say how things make sense, and that can feel very cohesive, and then there's always more to learn. There's always more information if we're open to it. So, she said astrology is a pseudoscience. And I remember seeing a sign in the classroom that said gravity, it's the law. And in my open mind, I was thinking, well, it's a law. I don't know if it's the law. And of course, you could say, well, gravity is the law, but then I couldn't help but think, and this is sort of the Neptunian dimension coming in, is it always a law? Is gravity always the law? And of course, on my own spiritual journey, I've come to realize the logical ordering of physical reality that we see is not the absolute. It's not set in stone. Everything that's manifest within creation is created at some point. It's created in time and it falls away in time. So I don't even personally have the belief. I don't have a strong faith or conviction that any of the laws of time and space are infinite, that they have to always be. And that's sort of where the Neptunian Pisces 12th house squared to that third house. There's that space for the miracle that doesn't have any logical explanation. And we can explain miracle in a very logical way. What is a miracle? We can, I study a course in miracles. And there are very sound, very rational ways of talking about miracles. How does a miracle work? Well, a miracle works when we let go of trying to control reality and we orient our attention to the source of all creation. Okay, great. That's a very logical statement, right? And the ideas of being miracle-mindedness, the ideas of what happens in the state of forgiveness. And actually, forgiveness in many ways relative to the Gemini third house archetype is letting go of the strong constructs that we've established that explains what and why everything is. Because there's so much more to reality. So coming back to the scientific frameworks, our ideas, there used to be a debate between Nachmanides and Maimonides, two medieval. Miracles are a part of nature or miracles are outside of nature. And I'm not going to go into that debate, but what I would offer, my perspective, is there's nothing that happened in reality that isn't of Creator, that isn't of God, that isn't an extension of love. And that there's only the truth, and then there's our understanding of it. Of course, that's a ninth house dimension, our comprehension of reality, our philosophical understanding. But then how we're able to logically point out its mechanism and how it all interconnects, how it all works. We might have a certain idea of physical reality that ends up creating a sort of mundanity. Things are mundane. This is the physical. And then there's God, then there's spirit. But is it possible to expand our mind to appreciate a way of thinking, a way of using logic that orients to an understanding of spiritual reality and thus seeing all the physical dimensions of life from this perspective of spirit? This says even our scientific explanations, it doesn't discount it. It doesn't say stars and gases and mathematical calculations and distances aren't real, but it says there's more data, there's more perspective, there's more information. And there's something very humbling about this. The answers that we have and the set of data points that we have are profoundly limited, and they are a reflection of where we're at in our evolutionary stage, where we are at in our evolutionary development. Consider other star beings from other solar systems, perhaps, that have the capacity and the technology and thus the perceptions of reality. Thus, they logically organize reality in a way that is different than ours because they're able to, let's say, travel many, many light years and visit other planets. If you believe in that or not, let's just say this is something that, again, I feel this is very much a reality. I've had experience of seeing, things that are otherwise not explainable within the logical constructs that we have. In the news recently, there's all these things that came out in the mainstream media of these these pilots from the Navy, whatever division it is that will fly in the sky, for many, many years repeatedly saw UFOs. And what these UFOs were able to do defies our current logical understanding of what is possible. And here's the issue with that. We see it, we don't have an answer for it because we don't have the data, and we don't have that data because we haven't asked the right questions. We haven't asked the right questions because our consciousness hasn't evolved to the point where we're even open to apprehend more of reality. Let's see, so coming back to the miracle-mindedness thing, there is a way to continue to expand our perception of reality where we're open to new connections, new ways of thinking of everything. Another interesting reflection on this, I was listening to a TED Talk yesterday. I'll post in the comments who this TED Talk was from. Maybe I can pull it up. It was from a therapist, and she was speaking about how, and she has a Dear Therapist column. People write in to share their stories and their struggles. And she observed that everyone's narrative of their life is very, very limited and not true. It's specific to how they're seeing their reality. And this is, by the way, where Mercury, third house Gemini, corresponds to short-term memory. Data, facts, information, and short-term memory, they're all the same thing. So we're going to remember selective fields of data, just like life is infinite, and we're pulling out selective data from this infinite array of possibilities. So we have very selective memory of what happened, what people said to us, how they said it to us, what their intention was, and maybe we'll even, logically explain it away. Yeah, I said this thing to this person and they deserved it. Or this person did this to me and I didn't deserve it. It makes sense to us. Totally makes sense. No, of course they deserved it. They were being an asshole. Of course I didn't deserve it. I was just sitting innocently. We're always going to create a story of reality that will generally conform to what we're wanting to think about reality. And it's going to be totally logical. It's going to feel very sound. But it's one narrative. In the same way, we can put 30 people in the same room and ask them to write an essay about the wall. Again, it's like you can have so many essays about the wall. And if you want to have a lot of fun, besides for the essays, everyone's handwriting is going to be different. And you can analyze everyone's handwriting, and you can pick apart so much information from the handwriting. And if you want to talk about the wall, you can talk about the color of the wall, the little speckles of paint, or the infinite shades of gray, black, white that's created through the light and the interplay between light and shadow. I mean, there's so many things. Part of what happens in the third house is we're looking at reality. And as I mentioned, it's not just what we hear. We're taking an experience through our senses, and that's the second house experience. And this experience isn't giving any kind of cognition. It's not made into data yet. So there's something that happens where we take in raw experience through our hands, through our eyes, through our feeling, through our listening, and also through our inner sensing, through inner feeling. And it's converted into thought. It's actually really kind of crazy if you think about it. The phenomena and the creation of thought, it has to be instigated. Thought is always relative to something, which brings up that whole question of like, where does thought come from in its originality, and who's thinking? Because thought only exists relative to a perception of object, which means there has to be some kind of sensory experience to perceive the object in the first place. So the phenomena of thought itself happens because we're taking in information through our senses, and we're making it informative via thought, thinking about it. It's a powerful thing that just the nature of consciousness is able to objectify experience in such a way. And thus, we're able to extract such profound nuance. There are, and I don't know anything about this, but I'm certain there are words to express the different shades of shadow. In fact, there are different words to express color. And there's black, and there's white, and then there's all these different shades of gray, ways of classifying data and information. You're hearing my voice speak. I'm gonna share this thought, then I'll exhaust it and I'll move on to the next piece. You're hearing my voice speak. You know, I'm sharing a what is it? I'll play a note. Here's a C. Is that a C? No, that's an E. Okay, E. Two E's. You're getting the E up here, and you're getting the But obviously there's like 1,000 differences between these two kinds of E's. Like, we can name it. We can name so many things that are different between my oh and this. And one of the differences is octave, right? This is higher up. Mine's lower up. And then the tonality, the vibrato, the sound. This is a particular kind of sound, whereas I don't even have the words to describe the nuances, right? The volume, it's the texture. Is it an O or oo or Where is it registering? And then the kind of voice and how my vocal cords are created. And then, so a note can be expressed and articulated, and thus words to describe it, in an infinite number of ways. It's actually quite profound. Now let's take it back home. This being said, we're all here on this evolutionary journey, and we're all going to be interacting and speaking to each other, both whether we're coming from the same culture, the same country, the same framework of understanding reality or not. It doesn't matter. We're all going to be starting with certain shared premises that allows us to share information. And this happens in every single way possible. And the thing that makes it available is the state of curiosity. We learn when we're curious. And besides for curiosity, it's also just the energetics, the archetype of receptivity, where the mind is open to take in experience as new information. We can be having a conversation with someone, but be so stuck in our own thinking that we're only hearing our own thoughts. We're not hearing what's being spoken. Or you can hear, a beautiful orchestra with complex rhythm and really interesting diminished chords and sus chords and sounds and octaves and harmonies. And we can hear it and actually identify infinite nuance if we're receptive, if we're paying attention. Thus, we allow our sensory experience to enter into us in such a way where it becomes information. It's a state of receptivity and openness, and it's purely detached, in a sense. It's purely detached of any particular quality of emotion. It's just a state of receptivity and openness and curiosity. And even emotion itself can be met in that way. The fact that we're able to say, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling pensive. That right there implies that we're able to engage some level of curiosity or receptivity or presence relative to a sensory experience. And the reason why that is so powerful and important is that it implies that our consciousness is fundamentally separate from the temporality of our experience. That we can identify even an emotion, that we can identify experience, means there's someone that's constantly aware, that is having this experience and learning and becoming aware, that's expanding, grasping more knowledge, more perspective, more insight. The fact of being able to identify data and information actually points to the freedom of our consciousness, which means we have to appreciate that what we learn and what we think we can learn and the information that's available to us really fundamentally points back to how we're holding it. The state of curiosity, the state of openness, the state of readiness to learn, which points back to our freedom, the freedom of consciousness itself. Okay, so let's share this chart again and look at some other facets of the third house. Capricorn third house Yod is a very important piece to speak to here. Capricorn says we're all a part of society. We're all a part of a particular reality where we have to agree upon certain rules to function. A very good example of that is stop at a red light. Relative to Gemini, that means we have to learn what a red light means. We have to give things definition and thus share a shared perception. We all have to, in the United States at least, right? In most countries probably, if not all, red light means something. We have to hold a shared perception as to what red light means so that we see red light, we all know how to take it in as information. Capricorn, Gemini in conjunct also says, wherever you go, we have to learn the fads, the ways of communicating, the ways of thinking, the ways of relating that is specific to that country or that nation. There are certain gestures or ways of behaving or ways of communicating that might be polite somewhere but impolite somewhere else. Might be part of how a culture relates or how you operate or communicate or get around in society. If you want to, travel somewhere, and of course the medium of travel is a part of the Gemini third house archetype because literally it's going from one place to the next. You're bridging. The movement of the body and the hand through time and space is almost like a metaphor for the movement of the mind. And we're gathering more experience. We're like a little lemming moving through life, sharing ideas, having experience, buying things, selling things, talking, speaking words, taking in information, having impressions, seeing billboards. And I'm going to get in a taxi, have a conversation, go somewhere else. It's an ongoing spreading of diversity and experience. But we're going to have to know how to pay for that taxi, how to hail a taxi. There are these things that are absolutely necessary for functioning in the world. When I do my taxes every year, I have to know the legalities and the words and the rules and how to interpret the words and speak the right words and ask the right questions. I mean, so much of this learning journey and the evolutionary journey relative to the third house is knowing how to ask the right questions so that we can figure out the things that we need to figure out and do the things that we need to figure out and fundamentally learn and grow and be able to be solid here in a grounded way. If I don't know what questions to ask, I'm not going to be able to function. And thus, the Gemini, Capricorn, third house, 10th house in conjunct reflects on one level the child that's in school, doesn't know how things work, and thus doesn't know how to ask the right questions to learn the things that they need to do in order to get by. And they shouldn't have to. They should be in a state of curiosity and openness where there's a lot that they don't know and a lot that they don't need to know. But the maturation that's required, that's needed along this journey, is that we recognize the responsibilities and the requirements of being here in this world, needing to function fully as an adult. And so we learn to focus our mind and create limitations. All right, I have to learn this, right? I can't just do whatever I want and scroll Facebook and waste my mind. I need to actually develop some discipline so I can grow and learn and function. A very practical expression of that is if you want to write, you learn how to write. You have to develop handwriting, which is a way of using form and tools and instruments and lead or ink to convey ideas. And there's a lot of coordination. These are all things that are functional. You have to learn how to type. It's all functional, which really allows us to then communicate and participate. Learning how to read is another example of that. The inconjunct between Gemini, 3rd house, Scorpio, 8th house. Let me take a sip of this tea. Points to the deeper psychological motives for the learning in the first place. When we are communicating, when we're investigating something, when we're researching something, the Scorpio in conjunct says, what's the purpose? What's the evolutionary intention? And it says we need to be able to have a developed capacity for concentration to extract useful information that's relevant. And what does Scorpio do? It takes what's necessary and it discards the rest. It digests and assimilates and releases what is not necessary. So there's a need here to eliminate identification with mental scatteredness or being able to use words to just be functional, getting by in life, or perhaps the archetype of, using words in ways that aren't honest, pattern of being duplicit in speech. And then it comes back down to what is this for? What am I trying to gain? What am I trying to achieve here? What's the point of the mind? And so being able to say, I'm here to go deeply and actually investigate my own thoughts. Why am I saying this? What am I trying to achieve? What is it I'm really wanting to know? It's very easy with Gemini, 3rd house, and we'll look at some examples, to get stuck in a mindset where we just get lost in thought, right? One thought leads to another thought, which leads to another thought, and we can just sit down in a chair and just endlessly be in a stream of thinking. Or we can be in a conversation where it's just total reactivity, one to another, to another, to another, or gossip, like, oh, did you see this thing or that thing? And it's all empty. It's all meaningless. We can distract ourselves. And in fact, mental distraction, if you think about Taurus as a form of self-distraction when it comes to sensual stimulation, tastes good, feels good. It can be a form of constantly giving ourselves a sensual experience so that we don't have to actually feel. Evolve that into Gemini, we're bombarding our senses with data, right? Everything sensual becomes information and data through the Gemini 3rd house. So we're constantly in thought. Thus, we're constantly thinking we're outside of ourselves. And this can become an endless form of distraction. So the Scorpio says, slow down. What are you doing? Get to the bottom line. What are you here to learn? What are you really here to say? What's the point of this? And it's a part of this whole journey of, especially in this day and age, we're pretty much glued to these things, these phones. And social media. Of course, social media is third house. And that communication and interaction and thought is actually rampant. There's data all over the place, but how much of it do we actually need? There's a funny thing that me and Michelle muse over often, which is we might have a conversation about something, and then like we'll see a Facebook ad for it. And it's like, do you Google that? No, I didn't Google it. And we kind of get curious every once in a while how that works, you know. Like, is my phone recording that, or who knows? You know, it's curious and sort of playful for me to consider that. But it's like, certainly if you're gonna search for something online, there are all these algorithms at play that will take it and then sell it to all these advertisers, and you go almost anywhere and you're gonna see advertisements for the things that you're typing in, if not thinking about or talking about in your kitchen. So it's a very curious reality that we're living in, where before we know it, we're bombarded with information all over the place. It's just everywhere. You know, I've shared this in one of my talks. I don't remember if it was for one of these talks or not, but Marshall McLuhan speaks about the idea that the medium is the message. And what that means is we don't realize that the particular social, technological environment within which we live actually defines the worldview and the world construct and how we're living in this life. We don't realize the extent to which it is fully operative and in control of us until we step outside of it and it's no longer operative. And an example of that is just the developmental nature of technology. Every single technological development, and thus mediums of communication that we use, is what we do, is how we live at that time. It's the only thing that we know. But before we knew it, we lived in a different world. So for example, we get in the car. I remember a time where I had to look at a map to know where I'm going. And that was the culture. And there's so much to say about that. Before the internet, before smartphones, you bought maps, which means you go to a gas station, you buy a map. You have a particular way of thinking about the road. We literally thought about the road and the environment that we're driving through differently. We perceived it differently when we were physical map oriented. We would talk about it. We would make plans differently when you wouldn't travel with a phone with you. We would communicate in different ways. Our conversations were defined in completely different ways. And it's almost impossible to emotionally apprehend that experience because it's not the one that we've been living every single day of our lives for several years now. Now with smartphones and someone talking to you with the voice that you get to decide, telling you where to go, and a little screen telling you where to go, we have a fundamentally different relationship to the road. We perceive our environment in a completely different way. And because of the accessibility of communication and data and how easy it is, we can be anywhere doing anything and be able to communicate, and thus the quality of how we talk. We can date and meet people and break up with people with words on a screen. That is a completely different way of relating to reality, and thus our logical frameworks, how we think about ourselves and each other in life, is specific to the world that we're living in. So the medium is the message is a very important piece to understand here. We're conditioned by and that's another Gemini 10th house piece, you can say. We're conditioned by the overall environment that we're in far more than we realize. It's completely encompassing. Okay, so at this point, what I want to do is give some examples of different archetypal combinations with third house. And for those that are here with me, I invite you to consider if you want to share your chart or ask any questions. I am going to pull up my screen here. Oh, let me just change the graphics here for a moment. Okay. Okay. Let's just play around with these archetypes. Let's say Aries in the third house, or let's say Mars in the third house. Mars or Aries in the third house. Here we're combining that Aries energy. Whatever is happening in the third house corresponds to our relationship to learning, to acquiring data, information, communicating, and sharing about it. It's like this is the library that we're hanging out in. It's the style and the way in which we're going about the learning journey, where we're all going to be building upon our logical framework of reality to understand more of the interconnectedness and then participating in the flow of exchange with all of life. So Aries has a need to think independently. There's a strong curiosity and a strong instinctive draw to have experiences that will satisfy the immediacy and the urge to know more, to learn more. Developing a certain quality of independence that allows them to think and form their own logical conclusions. If you think of Aries as blazing a new trail, it's thinking thoughts that will open up new doorways of experience. And third house is travel. Like, I'm going to go here and learn this and read this book, have this experience, taste this thing, and I'm connecting more, and I might be coming up with something that is new. I'm going to be putting thoughts together. This is a fun little, if you ever want to just have a party with a bunch of astrologer friends and hang out, here's a party idea. Call it third housing. And the party idea is one person takes out a piece of paper and writes down anything, like maybe make it a noun or a culture or an instrument, whatever. Pick the parameters. Another person takes out a piece of paper and writes down something else, and then you see what So like one person wrote flutes. The other person wrote Antarctica, and then the work is to combine the two. Create logical thoughts that connect our learning of flute and our learning of Antarctica. Have a conversation, and it's like, hey, what is the effect of temperature changes in Antarctica during the hot season on wind instruments? If you're temperature and wind instruments, like, there's so many ways you can go. It's unbelievable. Anyway, how does it affect the bamboo? If it's a flute made out of bamboo, how does extreme cold affect that? Modulations of breath relative to air pressure. Anyway, so there can be these new studies and research that comes through. Of course, what's the challenge here? The strong urge to be first, to think. There can be a lot of interruption. A lot of, I need to get my point across. There can be a lot of defensiveness within the third house. So one thing to consider in the third house, we can actually, it's not dogmatic like Sagittarius ninth house, but it can actually be very fixed and stuck in its logical organization of reality, to the point where then it's not letting in new information, because emotional security has been linked to its logical formulations. So I already figured all this stuff out. I'm not interested in hearing what you think. I already know the answer. I already understand it all. We could also be having a conversation with someone where we're interpreting data and we're giving it names, but we're blind to our own emotional triggers, right? You can put the moon in the third house, right? Fundamentally, moon in the third house means the way in which the soul is establishing emotional security is through being able to identify where they are in time and space. I feel secure if I can map out my reality. And thus there's going to be a sense of, I want to really get familiar. I want to know my environment. I want to know where everything is. I want to know the maps, the names, everything, so that I can feel safe and secure and at home. The challenge with that then Let's just progress that actually so that we can make this Cancer. Oh, wrong way. Okay. The challenge of that would be where subjective perception gets in the way. You know, I went somewhere new and I don't understand what they're speaking. I know they're not going to accept me. I'm not going to belong. I'm not going to feel loved here. I'm not going to feel welcome.
Ari,
Yes.
your chart didn't move. We're still on Aquarius ascendant.
Oh, thanks for pointing that out. Let me reshare it.
Sure.
Boom. Where we can take in perceptions of our reality, of our environment, in ways that resonate with our insecurities. And so we're mapping out a world and thus collecting data that reflects underlying insecurity. You know, it's kind of like a dog when they don't feel safe. They're going to actually feel very shy and not very open to interaction and sharing and connection. But when they feel safe, there's more of an exploration. They can interact more and there's more curiosity. See, curiosity actually fundamentally comes from a state of safety. And then extend that, the receptivity to learning comes from a place where we understand that we haven't figured it all out. So if we're not feeling good about ourselves, I mean, we can extend this as well to any of the water signs. Let's take Scorpio or Pluto in the third house. If we have a perception that's disempowering or distrustful, it's like, oh, you're hiding information from me, or, you know, this fear, this sense of, I need to get to the logical weak link of another person's argument because I actually feel threatened, or an underlying jadedness or distrust, or not believing other people, or, you know, feeling like you have to investigate everything very deeply before you can trust. There can be certain psychological states here with Scorpio or Pluto in the third where we're sort of bound by these darker perceptions of unsafe, distrustful, I'm going to be abandoned, I'm going to be lied to. And there's a curiosity there of our own state of mind. To be curious about the state of consciousness that we're bringing into the moment is to then realize that our narrative of the moment and thus our logical formulation of what's happening is very, very subjective and specific to our own evolutionary dynamics. So there's always a lot of value in getting curious about the thinker, right? Becoming very curious about, these thoughts feel stressful. Maybe I should be open to reformulating my perception, because my thoughts are implying a very limited, narrow framework of data, and it may not be so useful for me. You can take water. Let's go to Pisces. There can be a total openness to learning, a curiosity about everything, where it even leads us all to feel like I don't understand what people are talking about. Everyone's sharing these ideas, these concepts. I feel completely lost, because the insecurity with Pisces in the third can be the understanding that there's this inherent interconnectedness and these words are being spoken, but it's like, wait, how does that connect with this? How does that connect with this? And it can feel like swimming in an ocean of words and ideas and not knowing how they all connect and they grasp together. And then there would be a need to reorient to, what's my mind for? What do I really need to know? What's the purpose of communication? Actually surrendering the mind to a higher purpose. And there would also be a learning with Pisces in the third house, or Neptune in the third house, to ask questions, to actually develop more participation in the learning journey. It's like you don't just expect everything to make sense. There can be a feeling of disillusionment relative to total confusion and intellectual confusion and disarray and ideas and logics contradicting each other. Right? I had a total idea of why the sky is blue, and I'm 40 years old, and now I learned something else, and I don't know what to believe anymore. What's true? And the answer is, well, what's true is what's true. Like, reality isn't confusing. Reality actually isn't a contradiction to itself. We just don't have all the pieces. And so it's an invitation to come back to that curiosity, that openness to learn. And that's oftentimes an issue with Pisces Neptune, where we are disillusioned by the fact that we actually have to form a conscious relationship to life. And acknowledge that it's not all just going to work out. Our beliefs, our convictions, our hopes, our faith that we put into things, when it's not true, when it reveals itself to not be what we thought it was, it brings us back to this humility of, oh, I guess I don't know. And, you know, spiritual realization is pretty much that. It's pretty much, oh, I guess I didn't know. Because everything that I knew, everything that I formulated has gotten me to where I am. And how do I feel? Does it all feel cohesive? Does it feel very clear? You know, of course, Pisces or Neptune in the third house also can be in that state of openness. We can receive words, constructs, ideas that are given to us to say. You know, I have a Mercury Neptune, so that's a similar archetype to Pisces third. So I often receive instructions or words, often in my dreams, Neptune words or information. I had this one really neat experience where I was, it was a dream, and I'm walking through this Asian market, and I said, I'm looking for broth. And this lady, you know, brought me to a place and said, kombu broth. And I didn't know what kombu was, and I had to Google kombu. I'm like, oh, kombu is a seaweed. And I learned about kombu broth. It's like really good for the gut. There are so many health benefits to kombu broth. I haven't thought about that in a while. I used to drink it pretty regularly. So, you know, where does that information come from? Some part of me is receptive and open to it, but information can come in all kinds of ways. It doesn't have to be in the logical constructs of physical reality that we think is real. You know, angels are real. Spirits are real. There are all kinds of ways in which experience can happen, physical and non-physical. Okay, so let me stop there, and with the remainder of our time, just open up the field for any questions, or if anyone would like to offer their chart as an example.
I have a question on the children who have like a deficit of attention or hyperactivity, and that their learning process is different.
Great. I think I might have something to say about that. What arises first is I think about the Capricorn-Gemini relationship. So we have to appreciate the world we're living in and the expectations and the roles and the rules that we have about how people are to behave mentally and cognitively. For example, when I went to school, there was a lot of sit down, listen, write, a lot of training of the mind that in other times of history or in other cultures or in other countries or in different educational systems would be done differently. Right? You can compare a Waldorf education from a traditional public school education. So there's something to appreciate about how we perceive children's cognitive behaviors relative to the standards that we've placed on them. And that creates what we call normal, and then what we call not normal. But then those constructs of normal are very much what we're as a society ascribing. So that's one thought that arises. And there's a second one too. This is a good piece to speak to. So a function of the third house can often be that monkey mind, scatteredness, where there's no ground. So it can be the mind just going all over the place. One thought leads to another, or endlessly gathering data, picking up pieces of information but not completing it, going all over the place. Or hyper-sensitive mind that's very sensitive to what? The environment. The environment, essentially, from our subjective experience, is nothing other than what we're experiencing via our senses. It's all sensory experience. There is no environment beyond what we're experiencing. So there is in scientific terms, of course, but in terms of our experience, the environment is the stimulation that we're having. And so there's sounds, and that state of openness and curiosity, there's something useful for us. Just I'll speak to people in general, and then I'll go specifically to kids. This is just what's arising in my mind right now. There's nothing profound about it, or just flowing with it. There's something for us where we notice ourselves overstimulated and overdrawn with all the environmental stimulation, the texts, the phones, the data, the things that, and to just really come back to a ground of simplicity. That's that 9th house Sagittarius polarity, which is nature. What's natural? And there's a sort of intuitive way of being. Like when I'm out in nature for an extended period of time, I remember how healthy and how good I feel not sitting in front of the computer every day, where it actually becomes harder for me to acclimate back to computer time. And then what I notice is over time, it becomes addictive again, and phones become a little bit addictive to me. And it just becomes a habituated pattern. And so there's something about being able to simplify our life so that we're not overly stimulated. Because I think many of us humans are conditioned at this day and age to be overly stimulated. And if we're particularly sensitive to sensory experience, if we're Vata, to use the Ayurvedic diagram, if we're Vata type people, then we actually have to put extra attention towards creating ground and simplicity. And within that, there's something precious around the beauty of the mind, the beauty of how the mind is designed to extend thought and to uncover and to give outlets that are meaningful. It's like, what do we love to learn? What's interesting? What's exciting to us? And to fill our mind, our mental energy with that. And then coming to kids, that's just one thought that I have about it. It's not common for us to educate and teach our kids centered around their nature and their interest. I perceive and feel, this is my own judgment, and I don't know a lot of case studies, and I'm not here to talk that, but it's my intuition, I can say. My sensing is that a lot of the diagnosis is actually just a result of the way society is built, wherein we can actually just shift our orientation to what's this child's nature. Right? They're really curious. If you have, let's say, a loaded 3rd house, you're going to have a soul that's going to be converting sensory experience to thought. What they see, hear, think, feel, sense, everything is going to be converted into thinking. We need to give that direction and not try to contain it. That's the thing. 3rd house, 10th house. And also 3rd house, it's like we can't contain it, and we can't focus all this strong energy into a narrow mantra focus. Concentrate on one word at a time. But to go in the direction of Sagittarius polarity, what's your nature? What are you naturally drawn to? And to just give a lot of that so that the wandering mind has an outlet through which there's space and there's permission to explore it. And again, it's like, I'm sure there are many examples where there are more tools and techniques to work with in developing concentration. But I think there's something really valuable about encouraging children and all of us to use all these mental energies in the direction of what we're really interested in. And by the way, the Gemini 3rd house square to Virgo speaks to that as well. We develop technique, we develop a useful syntax of skill and coordination and knowledge that we can do something with, right? Developing the capacity to use tools and instruments in ways that improve the functionality of life. Of course, that's a Virgo 6th house thing. So we can say that developing our coordination relative to the use of an instrument, like a pencil, or learning how to play an instrument, for example, or learning how to type, that is 3rd house relative to the 6th house, the Virgo-Gemini interface. So there is something around showing up day after day that's true for all of us. The more you practice, the better you get. And feeling encouraged. You don't have to be perfect. Just keep on trying. Those are my open thoughts about a very open topic. And I just feel really passionately about engaging the learning journey through the lens of our natural affinities and interests, so that we can all learn what it's like to have a mind and to use it in a way that feels really supported And I think there's a lot for us to learn in this world and in the Western society in general about that.
Hi, Ari.
Hi, Wanda.
How are you?
Good. Good to connect. It's been a while.
Yes, it has been a while. And I just happened to something just said to check in and see what was going on today, which is just I just find it kind of amazing. I'm a third house South Node and conjunct Neptune.
All right.
So it's kind of I've been thinking a lot about just trying to understand that particular placement. Um, it really kind of feels like to me the third house is kind of that bridge and kind of jumping off of what Marie's question there as far as the ADD thing. I'm beginning to think or have been coming to this conclusion that the third house and the Mercury and Gemini archetype is kind of that bridge from even say the Pisces, Aries, and Taurus, because the seed has everything it needs. It knows what it is.
Oh, I like this.
So
That's beautiful.
maybe the third house Gemini archetype is that bridge for the environment that it now finds itself in.
Wow.
For the people that or things and entities that were already in this environment, that bridge of communication of figuring out, what this new entity is and how, each can interact with each other.
That's so beautiful, Wanda. I love that.
Yeah.
Reminds me too of I go through phases of listening to different alternative news channels, and yeah, sometimes I appreciate it. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't see things that way, or there tends to be a lacking of a spiritual perspective on life in these news channels, and I'm aware that we can bring a spiritual perspective into life where we're actually looking at it as, I love what you said about the seed contains all the information. There's something so that feels very Neptune in the third, something so poetic and almost forgiving about that, right? That there's the knowledge and the information of creation is contained within itself. But I see how in news channels the reporting and the data and the information that's shared about what's happening in the world is, of course, completely limited according to the mediums that are communicating them, right? The people that are communicating about the news and the events and the things that are happening. They have their point of view, they have their reference, they have their biases. And sometimes I can hear things being spoken where judgments and opinions are being mixed in with fact. It could be as simple as calling a particular politician a name. Well, that name is a word that we're ascribing to someone to elicit a particular way of thinking about them, but it's not a fact. And it's very interesting to think about like, what is actually factual about life. And I think in many ways, factual is a subjective experience that is very much relevant to what it is we're seeking to know and what we're seeking to learn. We can say it's a fact that I'm a man, but that is true only relative to these social agreements and contracts. We say it's a fact that I'm speaking the English language. That is absolutely true, but we have to agree upon that first. Like, facts only exist because we're agreeing that this is the English language. If one of you said that's not English, I would say, well, I have millions of people to back my view that this is English. It doesn't make you more wrong than me. It just says it's factual only relative to a collective agreed upon decision that we're all for the most part working with. It's what makes life workable. I forgot what you said that elicited that, but did you want to share more? I feel like there's another piece in there.
Yeah, it's like that forcing of and I know that there's things that, you know, have to be done when you're in a certain environment, certain culture, whatever. However, we tend to want to make a fish act like a human being and then call it stupid when it doesn't
Exactly.
do the human
That
thing.
was it. Yeah.
And to me, that seems to kind of encompass that third house. And there's so much to learn from different entities, different people, different cultures that tend to get, you know, thrown away because we want everybody to conform to this one thing when that's not nature in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
So there seems to be a lot in,
So
you
much.
know, within that third house Mercury Gemini archetype that I even feel like even within the astrological community is kind of downplayed and, you know, looked upon when it is such a bridge. It's that first bridge.
It's so essential. It's so essential. The degree of assumption that goes unchecked in our formulations of reality are so, it's, you know, by the way, I have a loaded third house too. I grew up speaking very fast. I try to remember to slow down today as well. But I used to speak so fast that I would slur my words and people couldn't hear me. I actually had to learn to slow down. I have Uranus in the third conjunct my south node. So it's like holding a lot of ideas at once together, like seeing the whole system, but not knowing how to articulate it and take it apart bit by bit, give it logical expression. It's just sort of observing. And so being able to articulate sort of broader view into clear, intuitive, accessible, logical formulations has always been a challenge for me. And sort of translating broader-minded Uranus and Sag understanding into clearly articulatable ideas. Also holding too many thoughts at the same time and trying to apprehend a greater understanding of logic, leading to almost like an overload where it's like a mental blowout. And there's dissociation, like a disconnect. It's been a big part of my journey. But one thing that I think about is how we think we're so smart. And I think of Uranus in the third house or Aquarius in the third house as an example of this. We can look at ancient civilizations and be like, oh yes, we are more intelligent than them because look at the technologies that we have or the things that we've developed in our medical fields. And yet we're looking at life from a particular starting point, a certain assumption that says our way of life is better. And yet we can also say, wow, look at how wise the ancient people were. They weren't destroying the environment. They weren't destroying their health with the diets that they ate. Ancient times, there's almost like no notion of such things, and to the extent that we do it today. And we even have all these scientific realizations around ancient pyramids. The further back you go in time, this is amazing. The more mathematically complex and more of an anomaly these ancient pyramids are. The newer pyramids were less complex. Like the really, really ancient ones all around the world, people are like, how did they even move those big stones? Thousands of pounds. Now, what we do is we try to form a logical answer according to our current day thinking. Every era has always done that, and it's so short-sighted. We need to be able to appreciate, there's a lot that we don't know. And there's actually a really great book that talks about the possibility of our solar system being a part of a binary star system, written by Walter Cruttenden. It's a book on, I'll put in the links too, it's a book on, I think it's called The Lost Star of Myth and Time or something like that. And he talks about what actually creates the yugas, what actually creates the precession of the equinox. And I won't go into all the heady science, it's fascinating, but he points out how the scientific view of the equinox, the precession of the equinox, which, I grew up learning in school that it's because of something with the gravitational pull of the sun and moon. There's a lot of issues with that logic. one being, if that's what's causing the precession, then it would also account for a shift in planetary movement outside of the Earth's orbit, which it doesn't, implying that whatever causes precession has to be relative to the entire solar system. Otherwise, we'd be noticing fluctuations in our perception of all things happening outside of the Earth anyway. Yet, that's the prevailing view that people still teach. We hold on to our logical ideas and our judgments and opinions and projections on things of life, even if it doesn't work. It's like, here's a theory, or here's our logical formulation for how these things work. And it's important to question them, be open to learning more, and even being open to throwing it out entirely if we come across a new set of data. So in his book, he actually talks about these ancient civilizations and the yugas, and how there's a time where the ancients were far more evolved than us today. And connects that with the precession of the equinox and binary star theory. It's really beautiful book. And Sri Yukteswar, who is the spiritual father of evolutionary astrology, he actually brings in a lot of Sri Yukteswar's teachings in his book, Holy Science. So, okay. This was fun. It was a very third house class, a lot of little discussion. And I hope this just opens up to appreciate the expanse. Let me just speak a little more to Uranus in the third house to close this, to give another good example. What's happening there? What's Aquarius or Uranus in the third? We're liberating from the projection of the mind onto reality that says these are the facts of life, which then becomes a crystallized way of thinking of things that is all a projection of thoughts that we've created about life. So we liberate and we ask the question, what is it? And fundamentally, we're observing reality, and we're developing a language and a way of identifying the things of life from a broader, higher-minded point of view. And that Uranus in the third is thus going to be very, very different depending on the soul stage of evolution, right? We can develop a higher spiritually science perspective, right? Apprehend a greater understanding of reality from the point of view of the cosmic cycles of astrology, understand the intelligence of creation, and then being able to identify archetypes. And we can see the things of life from the more energetic archetypal point of view. And so a third house Aquarius would manifest as understanding the metaphor of all things. So it's kind of like we're looking at everything as a tarot card, and we're seeing that all the data and the information are actually just pointing to universal archetypes that are reflecting the intelligence of creative design. Or we can be looking at life and just observing a more brilliant understanding of how archetypes and different universal expressions manifest, and have very beautifully, logically sound ways of putting it all together. We can be interested in studying the environment and understanding the interconnectedness between different areas of the environment and how it all impacts a larger field. Anything that we're doing where we're seeing things as an observer, third house, third observer is Aquarius, Uranus, observing, no names, no classifications, pure observation. And when we observe, we're having raw experience, seeing things as like looking at a telescope and observing the movement of a star, or sitting in meditation and observing an interior process, or looking at the ecological environment, watching a stream and observing all the little creatures in the stream, and then marking scientific data as a result of these observations, and then formulating a more holistic seeing of the environment. The challenge, though, is where the mind can get so stuck on, this is a Uranus Aquarius issue in general, where it gets almost diluted by its intelligence, and it thinks that it can reach God through its own intellect. So there's that need to understand that we can't apprehend the wholeness of reality with our mind alone. And that's where that Leo 9th house polarity would be very important, which is have an openness, have an intuitive experience of life living through you in this moment. Don't make everything a rational scientific discovery, because you can burn out. You can just kind of get frayed mentally if you do that. All right. I'm going to take a breath and ground and close this class. Thank you, everyone, for joining me in this class.
Thank you, Ari. That was wonderful.
Yes, thank you, Ari.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
See you
Thank
next time.
thank you.